Today, I want to talk to you about fear and how to start letting go of fear and learning to just face life as it comes and learning to totally live in trust and surrender, a peaceful state where you are no longer anxious about what may come. And I'm going to share with you my experience with one of the things that I employed in my spiritual practice that helped me to start becoming less and less fearful of life and just allow myself to do the things that I wanted to do and live the life I want to live without constantly succumbing to what may happen, if it's going to work out, and things of that nature. So we constantly live in fears because we don't know what's going to come. The future is entirely unknown. And in a way, that is what life is. Life is the unknown. That itself is the first thing we have to come to acceptance of. If you look at your mind's activity, it's always just trying to make the unknown into the known in order to feel safe about it. It's constantly trying to create ideas about the future, about what it must be, and how to secure that outcome. And because the mind senses that what it wants may still not happen, and what it does not want may happen, because the future is the unknown and the unknown is infinite possibility, it feels insecure. No matter how much it projects and conceptualizes about the future and tries to predict it and tries to control it, it still feels insecure. So we have to come to acceptance of the fact that the future is unknown. That itself allows us to at least start to practice what I'm about to share with you. And another thing is you have to just realize that no matter how much you try to control through your mind, the future is still unknown. So rather than constantly worrying and suffering the unknown, you might as well learn to face it as it actually is. Once you start to embrace the unknown, you will no longer resist the unknown. Resistance of the unknown is what we call the feeling of fear or anxiousness. Embracing the unknown, you will find life takes on a brand new creativity and spontaneity, a peacefulness, a restfulness, where you don't know how you're going to figure things out, but you trust that it will come to you. And it always does. So to begin with, right, that's the first thing. Now, what is the main thing that I employed in my spiritual practice to start becoming free from fear? I started to observe impermanence. Impermanence in three things. Number one, impermanence in the circumstances that I was fearing. And I'll explain in a second what that means. I started to observe impermanence in the body that needed to do and act in those circumstances. And I observed impermanence in the mind, which was itself fearing, right? The mind, which is fearing of what's to come and how I will be okay and whatnot. Observing impermanence in three of these things: circumstance, body, action, and mind, worrying, fearing. I would notice that because I went through this cycle a couple times, so I started to really pay more closer attention to it. The circumstance that I was fearing before any of these teachings came to my life, I started to notice that the circumstance that I was fearing, some which are absolutely unavoidable, right? And those circumstances, they come into your experience. They do come and then they go. They come and they go. No matter how hard you try to stop them, sometimes they still come. And when they're here, they may be unpleasant, but they happen and then they go. So that's the first thing, observing the impermanence of circumstance. And I'll tell you why this is significant. Number two is observing on the action level, the body that is doing. I would notice that the circumstance that I'm fearing, when it comes, somehow, even if it's unpleasant, the body acts and takes care of whatever needs to be done. And then that also changes. And third, I would observe the mind. It's fearing what may come. But when that circumstance does come that it was fearing before, even if it's unpleasant and it suffers, it figures out what it needs to figure out. And then also the state of mind also changes. When the circumstance passes, the mind is once again peaceful, and then maybe starts looking forward to some other event. And then once again, it becomes fearful. I would start to notice the impermanence in all three of these things. And so what I started to practice is that now when I would start to fear something that was coming up, I wouldn't try to avoid it anymore. It's not like I was trying to make it happen, but I would just no longer avoid it. And I would let that experience come, even though I was so fearful about it. And then I would notice that when that experience really came, the thing that I had to do in the level of action is trust. Because, we are unwilling to face the circumstances that we are fearing is because we feel like we can't deal with them. We won't know how to figure out what we need to do and how to take care of them and how to overcome them. What I started to do is like, I started to allow the circumstance to come into my experience without resistance. And I started to live in total trust that when it came into my experience, life, God, the self would imbue to me, would give to me, would bestow to me the intelligence, the strength, the courage, the creativity needed to take care of that circumstance. And this it takes a little bit of trust in the beginning, but when you start to do this, you really start to see how, like, when that circumstance that you were fearing comes into your experience and you trust, the body acts. It's already actually happening in your experience, and it has happened so many times. Just take a look at all the things you have ever feared. They have come and gone. They have happened, and in the moment you have taken care of things. Where do you think that's coming from? You see, in this moment, the body is always directed to do what it needs to do in order to take care of whatever situation or problem. And so I started to just notice that. This is all about noticing it, becoming aware of these things so that you are no longer a slave to these unconscious cycles of worry and fear and resistance, and can start to just like embrace them and now live in in this trust. So I started to trust that whatever I needed to, like whatever intelligence I needed to figure things out in the circumstances that I was fearing would come to me. And I would notice that it always comes. And then third, I'm noticing on the level of the mind, how what a trickster the mind is, that it's totally in a state of suffering and fear over a circumstance it cannot control or avoid. And I would notice that it fears and worries and is totally suffering until that circumstance comes. But when that circumstance is here, the mind is like a very useful tool. It is where that intelligence that's coming from beyond shines, and it uses the mind to orchestrate the actions of the body and take care of the whole circumstance. And I would notice that in the moment the mind also becomes very functional. Previously it was just totally useless because it was just projecting ideas and fears and whatever, but in the moment it just, whatever needs to be done, it just gets focused and gets it done. And then after the circumstance passes, the mind is relaxed. I just started to see that, like, all these three layers of mind, action, and circumstance, they are so impermanent. Why do they have so much power to, like, so much power and influence over me? Why am I so bound to them? I kept seeing that, like, living this life, you do have to overcome challenges and do things. If you want to live an authentic life, it will require you to do things that you're uncomfortable with and things that you fear. So I just started to see that, like, if that's just something that must happen in life, why suffer it? Why resist it? Instead, just allow it to be as it is. If you do fear a circumstance, that's okay, but don't fight against that circumstance. Don't avoid it. And don't fight against or avoid the fear itself. You let the circumstance come. And then trust that in that moment, you will, on the mental and bodily level, know how to take care of it and what to do. And that even if you don't know what to do in that moment, it will little by little come to you. In this way, I began to see that there's like nothing worth ultimately fearing. That you can be a little anxious about the circumstance that maybe is coming to you, but it's like when you start to live in trust that it will be taken care of, then it's like it doesn't have that paralyzing power over you. You become a little more aligned with the flow of life, letting things come and go. And you become wiser because you're no longer identified with the changeful body and the changeful mind. You're no longer sourcing your sense of well being and security, safety, happiness from these changeful states. And you actually really start to realize that, like, that is the reason I was so like restless and not at peace because I was for me to be peaceful, I needed the circumstance to be pleasant. I needed the state of the body and action to be pleasant. And I needed the mind to be pleasant. But how rarely does that really happen? How hard is it to always have a pleasant state of mind, body, and circumstance? Why should we depend on these changeful states, changeful experiences for a sense of peace and happiness and security and identity? You are the changeless witness of all three of these things. Let all three of these things happen, come and go. Let all circumstances that are meant for you come and go, even the ones you fear. And start to rely on an intelligence that is beyond your mind. Your thinking comprises a very like small percentage of the true intelligence which runs this entire world. When you step into trust, when you surrender to that greater intelligence, you are becoming wiser. You start to have a greater, like access to greater resources, greater intelligence and creativity, which starts to shine in your experience and orchestrate the thoughts of your mind and the actions of your body. Knowing this, what have you left to fear? So one last thing I will say to you is like, also just start to see the uselessness of fear. Until you start to see the uselessness of worry, fear, anxiousness, it will control you. You have to see that it serves no purpose. No matter how much you think you can control circumstances or avoid them, you cannot. And, you know, the circumstance that you're avoiding may make you maybe unpleasant when it's here, but it's better to just experience and face that unpleasant circumstance than to constantly suffer. That experience that may be unpleasant is only going to be unpleasant for the time that it's here because it's going to pass soon. But the suffering from fear and worry and anxiousness doesn't end with that circumstance. It seeps over into the next circumstance that you're going to fear, and the next, and the next. It never ends. That's the thing we have to realize about fear. It never ends, and it's absolutely useless. It doesn't accomplish its goal. Within fear is the idea that the more I fear, somehow that's going to control my experience or help me avoid the circumstance that I'm avoiding. But it doesn't. If that thing is meant to happen, it still will. But now you can start stepping into trust, surrender, intelligence, and you'll find yourself peaceful. The mind may still be fearing a little bit, and especially in the beginning when you start practicing this, it won't fully know this. So it'll still fear, but like you'll find that, hey, there's a greater like rest because you're just opening yourself up to the unknown. Fear is a state of being closed and it limits you, it contracts your being, which is why I feel so bad. Whereas trust and surrender and just observing the impermanence of all things, it opens you up. You become spacious, space like, no resistance, no conflict within you. That's what's required for peace and all spiritual growth as well, because, fear isn't only going to pollute your personal life, it's also going to block your spiritual growth. So realize that it serves no purpose. It only blocks all the things that you really care for and desire out of life. And let me know what you think about this. If you have any great takeaways from today's video or if you found it helpful, I would love to know what point really connected with you. Also, if you need help with your spiritual practice, join our free group. In there, you'll find a free course and you'll be able to interact with our community. And if you want greater help and you want to join our meetings and retreats and our self-inquiry course, our emotional mastery course, to really help you dissolve mind identification and start awakening to your true nature, your true peace, happiness, clarity, learn more about Self-Inquiry School and enroll down below. Thanks for watching today's video. See you next time.